Okay. So our agenda, we're going to talk about percent complete, what it's for, task percent complete calculations, various setup options, management of percent complete. There are a lot of different switches and different features that drive percent complete. And for something as simple as percent complete, it actually can get on the complex side. We'll talk about forecasting in particular, some revenue forecasting with your using different percent complete calculations, the administration setup option, and then we'll talk about a couple different customization options and some unique things that we've done for folks to get your creative pieces of your brain flowing there. So first things first, what about percent complete and what it's for? Simplistically, percent complete provides a means to determine where a project or an individual task within that project is and what the work remaining is. Unless percent complete calculations are disabled to manually, so that folks can manually update them, percent complete, it's a simple division of approved and planned or estimated hours. That's one of the switches. And then the project reflects all of the tasks within that. So here we've got the task view saying my general task is 40%, my deliverable task is 0%. Therefore, as a whole roll-up, my project is 20% complete. So again, just at a very high level, what the percent complete is looking at. The simplest application of percent complete, again, is approved hours divided by planned hours. And just because a task has 10 hours, for example, there's nothing preventing the timesheet from allowing hours over that. So if someone were to log 20 hours, it's still going to allow those hours to be put in there. That said, if the approved hours exceed the planned hours, the percent complete will stop at 100%. It's not going to hit 200% or anything over that 100% complete number. And for that reason, it is important to maintain the planned hours as they may change. And again, depending on statement of works and change orders and such. While the simplest method might be the approved divided by the planned hours, OpenAir does offer the flexibility to divide this number by estimated hours instead of planned hours. Enabling the hours remaining on tasks estimating feature will allow you to use these hours and have more of a dynamic calculation. Only one or the other can be enabled, either estimated or approved hours, which get divided by the estimated or approved, yes, divided by the planned. And then with the estimated hours feature enabled, the user or the project manager can enter the estimated hours remaining on a task at the time they are entering their time on their timesheet. That said, this particular one does require more diligence and upkeep and paying attention to hours across the board. If you are using the estimated hours remaining feature, and if that's enabled, you can see the actual calculation from within the task. So when you are in there, there is a dialog box on the very far left. Typically that dialog box, depending on your role, it may or may not be visible, but for administrators it absolutely is. If you click on that dialog box to the left, it'll show you the actual calculation. So here you can see the hours approved, hours remaining, and then the math to come up with the fact that my project is 24% complete. In the estimated hours, with the estimated hours remaining feature, that denominator in this scenario here is approved hours plus the estimated hours remaining. So that's where I'm getting the 328.5, and I super small, but I think that's the math off the top of my head. The 328.5 is the estimated, the 250 plus the 78.5, and then the fact that I've had 78.5 worked on that one. Okay, so we've covered in detail the task itself, but what about the other project components? There are different things to consider in terms of closed tasks, in terms of phases, because those will hold a roll-up of the tasks. Milestones, which will play into the calculation. Milestone and task technically are the same thing. A milestone, if you were to add that in, just doesn't have assignments or people logging time to it. And then there's obviously the project roll-up. So we'll start digging into the details of each of these here. So if your business or services model dictates that the percent complete is not based on hours, rather on more qualitative efforts, OpenAir does allow the option to manually set the percent complete on each task, where this bar, the percent complete bar, can be slid from left to right to determine what percent complete it is. And the increments are controlled in the administration module, whether you want 5% increments, 25% increments, you've got control over the incremental levels there. Again, this does require diligence for sure, and definitely some internal communication in terms of what constitutes a project being 45% complete if you are going to leave it up to more of a qualitative and subjective measure by the project manager. An option that works great for both milestone management and billing rules, which generate a fixed fee charge based on completion of that milestone, is to set up tasks as milestones, meaning, again, no time would be logged to the task. That, coupled with enabling the setting to mark closed tasks 100% complete, will allow you to track those. With this setup, a project manager would close a task once the deliverable is complete, and then upon clicking save, the percent complete updates to 100% automatically. Assuming a billing rule is then set up to bill a fixed amount upon 100% completion of the milestone, the charge will be generated upon the next billing run. A couple best practices are to set up a task type equal to the word milestone. So these can be easily filtered and grouped, and again, not allowing users to be booked to or log time against these milestones, as that's going to skew the percent complete. And that's a typical, very common practice that we recommend and implement with folks. If we've worked with you, we've probably had discussions about that and about the setup and marking those there. Project and phase percent complete, again, are fully automatic and are a direct roll-up of the task percent complete. Meaning if you open up the task percent complete to have that subjective or that qualitative number being slid there and set, you cannot manually set the project or the phase level. Those are, again, a direct roll-up of the tasks. The phase, again, is a roll-up of its child tasks, and the project is the roll-up of all of the tasks within the project. And there's a little asterisk with that because the project is really a roll-up of all the tasks within the project which also have planned hours, and frankly, which only have planned hours. Again, depending on the method that your organization is set up for, percent complete is going to be calculated based on either approved hours or estimated hours divided by the planned hours. So here in this example, and we're going to get into some examples as well, you can see that there are two tasks, general and deliverable are the names, that each have planned hours. Only one of them has approved hours next to it. And then I have 3 different billing milestones which don't have planned hours. So those are not going to compute up into the overall percent complete. And again, I'm going to dig into some specific examples in just a moment. When a task has exceeded the planned hours, the cap for the numerator is the planned hours only. It's not going to be the total approved. And that's because OpenAir doesn't calculate percent complete in excess of 100%. So as you can see here in this example, I've got task 1. I've got 3 different tasks. My percent complete for the project or my phase really is phase, so I guess we're looking at here, is 72.7%. Now, if you were just looking at approved over planned, you're going to get something 125 and 0%. You're not going to come up with that 70, or even just looking at the hours, I should say. You're not going to come up with the 72.7%. You're going to come up with 100% because it's saying we've got 44 hours approved and only 44 hours were planned, so we're there. But again, when you've gone over what it's looking at there, that task 1, again, that's 100% complete with the 24, but then only 2 of my 8 hours, so 25% of those hours have been approved, and 6 of my 12 hours have been approved on the last one. Make sure I'm reading that right, yeah. And so that one's at 50%, actually. Yeah, looks like my number's a little bit off in the chart. But basically, it's because those 44 hours are not earned, which is why I've got the 72.7%. So again, digging into an example, it's a little bit fuzzy, but digging into this example, in terms of milestones, how we discuss the percent complete on these being set to 100% upon closure, because there are no planned hours and subsequently 0 approved hours on the examples there on the left and right, we don't have rogue numbers being calculated into the overall percent complete value. Here you can see at this project, the one on, well, both really, you can see that this project is at 20% completion based on the fact that we have a 40% completed task and a 0% completed task, and with these first 2 tasks on the left and right. And again, those are the only ones that have planned hours. In the picture on my right, you can see I've got 2 of my milestones 100% complete. Again, I'm not going to have those 100%. Those are not calculating into my 20% project calculation because there are no planned hours. So that's the nice way to keep those milestones separate, and they're not confusing the calculation. And where's my, okay. And again, you can see here that only tasks with planned and approved hours are factoring into the project percent complete. In the second picture, the one on the right on the side, even though no hours have been approved on that second task for deliverable, that deliverable task has been marked 100%. And so OpenAir then assumes that with that closure, i.e. with that 100% completion there, it assumes that 250 out of 250 hours have been approved. So the difference there, my picture on the right says 66% complete, and that calculation is based on the 78.5 hours from my first task plus 250 from the second, which are kind of ghost hours there. If you see, you don't see 250, but because that task has planned 250, it's been marked 100% complete, it assumes that 250 have been delivered, thus calculating the 66% as opposed to 20% on the left-hand side. So jumping into the revenue forecasting and looking at forecasting options, charge projections with some of these percent completes, they factor into more than just charges. They also serve as the foundation for revenue forecasting, and what charge projection settings you have selected will be considered with the reporting value. There are also several internal switches which can be factored in to using calculations for percent complete. So again, just a screenshot here of the charge projection screen. To access this, it's located under the administration module, application settings, and then project settings, and then there's a link that says charge projections. The settings on this form are generally a one and done setting, and then I don't have in this particular screenshot, but there's a date there that says it's your pivot date from which to use. Think of that as your line in the sand of your actuals versus your forecasted hours. So depending on which option you're using, I'd say some of the more common ones are either approved and book hours or approved and assigned hours. But again, depending on your business, there's a bunch of different options to support your configuration there. There is an internal switch, and you just want to be sure, again, as you're getting into these charge projections, there are several internal switches that are available. Again, depending on the specific use case, we can help guide you on which ones might need to be enabled. But again, you just wouldn't want to use the internal switch to use booked or assigned hours before today when you're using charge projections that also consider approved and work or booked and assigned. It'll muddy up the numbers there because of that line in the sand. Again, if you're looking at approved hours in the past, and ideally what you want to look at is approved hours in the past and booked hours, for example, in the future. And so using that internal switch that we just discussed will alter your results. So I've got a couple examples here to take a look at. And this is why the consideration must be made, again, based on how you want to and need to see the forecasting data based on your different percent complete calculations and forecasting. So in the first example on the left, without that switch enabled, think of the amount as cumulative in terms of what is forecasted. So I've got a budget of $1,000. I've recognized, so this is my historical amount, 800, but I'm projecting to recognize 1,000 total. So this is my cumulative. It's going to, effectively just keep building up. The second example, or the picture on the right, this breaks out the amount with a harder line in the sand in terms of what has been recognized versus what is projected in the future. So it's saying we're recognizing 800. We've got a line in the sand. And then what we're still looking at in the future, we've got $200 remaining. And so that's the difference of looking at, again, some of these internal switches and the impact they can have on your data is exactly how you're going to be seeing it and making sure that you're prepared to see those. So again, within the revenue forecasting, the 3 separate revenue recognition rules, which take into consideration percent complete, are the percent complete rule. We'll talk about that one, just a very simple, straightforward, fixed amount on percent complete. Again, very simple, straightforward, and then the incurred versus forecast. Each of these has their own variables, and then some of them have internal switches which might need to be considered. So looking at both our booked hours or assigned, depending if you're using assignments instead of bookings. Again, those will factor into the equation based on the switches and total hours. And there is actually a very good detailed diagram with these within Suite answers on the forecasting and the booked hours. And then the budget hours factoring into the equation just with the straight line forecast. If you've got 1,000 hours and you just need to straight line it out over 10 months, for example, you can just get a very even amount there. So again, the percent complete recognition rule, or even the fixed amount on percent complete rule, they're very simple and straightforward based on defined parameters within the recognition rule. So you've got different options. If you want to say it's percent complete for the project, percent complete for a particular task or phase. If you don't want to look at that, you can look at approved versus planned hours for. You've got phase and task options in this drop-down menu, and or you can look at budget hours. So it just gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you're looking at this. If you're looking at, for example, a fixed amount on a date or milestone or on a percent complete, if you're looking at $50,000 to be recognized, again, that's just going to be a hard date. If you say, at 100% completion of X task, recognize 50%. When X task is marked and hits that 100% complete, probably closed, or once the hours have all been worked, that's when that revenue is going to show up in your reporting. So getting a little bit more complex is the incurred versus forecast recognition rule. Again, this is the one where that date one of the areas where that date plays into, on the charge projection page, plays into the calculation. Again, think of that date as your line in the sand. It's really this line here, this division line between incurred and forecast. So everything before that date is your incurred, is your actuals. Everything after that date is your forecasted amount. And again, the incurred amount on the rule, you've got the option to look at different components, whether you're looking at timesheets, expenses, purchase items. You can also exclude certain items. So you've got different configurations there. And then again, your forecast. So that number, those two numbers divided over each other is going to give you your revenue and your revenue recognition percent complete there in terms of forecasting. When to use the incurred versus forecast recognition rule, when you're needing to split revenue by user, there's an option on the rule to break that out based on the time and materials amount, for example, that the time that each user has entered against that project. Or if you need to consider expense or purchase cost in your percent calculation and percent complete there. If you do, just a little tip here, a trick that we've used several times, if you want to split revenue by user but not factor in costs, if you enable, within OpenAir, you've got the ability to enable between 1 and 3 levels of cost at the user record. So if you have the secondary and tertiary cost levels enabled and just rename one of them to the $1, what that does is it turns that $1 cost for users into hours. So it looks at the hours worked. If person A worked 50 hours, person B worked 42 hours in a given period, and you've got them each assigned to $1. Person A is going to have $50. Person B is going to have $42. So just kind of a little extra thing in there if you're not factoring in the cost and really want to turn $1 into hours there. So that is on the recognition rule and some of the forecasting we've got there. Jumping into the customization, switching hats again and looking at the different options here, there's several ways to accomplish customization based on your organizational needs. So the first of custom calculations, just looking at actual hours over budget hours instead of approved hours. So maybe you didn't want to use approved hours, or maybe you didn't want to use the planned hours, you wanted to use your budget hours, for example, on your project. So you would just set up a custom calculation there. You can call it percent complete, custom percent complete, and then that would be a reporting value to pull up and look at. Scripting, again, the sky could very much be the limit on these based on unique calculations. An example, if you wanted to do, like worked hours over, maybe there was a custom field and you weren't using the standard budget hours field, you wanted to use worked hours over baseline hours for that particular task or that particular project. So we can do, several different options there with the scripting. And then the last option, or not the last, but an additional option is using the form filters on the tasks. So in this instance, we would use a custom calc plus filters. So when you're setting up a custom calculation, this is where you can exclude certain, for example, task types. So I'm going to use the example of pre-sales. Let's say that you have a pre-sales task on all of your projects. However, you don't want, and maybe you're planning out pre-sales and budgeting, say, 50 hours of pre-sales. But you don't want those hours to factor into your percent complete for the project as a whole, for example. So if I'm looking at that, if I set up a task type of pre-sales, I can, or maybe even check the box that says non-billable using something on that task form. I have the ability then, when I'm setting up my custom percent complete up here on the top left, I have the option within that calculation to then go in and say, I'm going to only use, this task type and that task type. I'm not going to consider my pre-sales task type in that. So with those custom calculations, again, using the filters just gives you an extra layer of depth. There's a slew of different things you can do, though, again, just based on what it is that you need to do. So in summary, and again, just some of the high-level best practices, things to remember, being aware of the percent complete controls and settings. There are a lot, and it certainly can turn into a deep hole. So don't get so far down and start going switch happy, especially. Just making sure that you've got a good handle and you're aware of what's enabled and what's set within the UI so that you're understanding where your data is coming from and why it looks the way it does. Determining the most reliable source of calculation for actuals and forecasting. So again, defining, again, what it is you need within the organization and what sort of data you need to look at, and that will make sure that you've got the correct settings in place to support that. And then again, leveraging the Milestone close control for quick 100% updates. As I mentioned earlier, if you've worked with us before, it's definitely something that we recommend for your milestones. Keep the hours out of them, maybe even set up a phase called milestones or billing milestones, just to keep those separate and in their nice little clean and organized area where those can be marked complete and 100% once they're finished.